In Israel, a rescue and a resignation. Israelis are rejoicing after a weekend raid freed 4 hostages in Gaza. At the same time, the nation's government is trying to stay together.
Well, Benny Gantz, a member of Israel's war cabinet, announced his resignation. He criticized Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and called for new elections. Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
As Israelis celebrate the daring rescue of 4 hostages held in Gaza, Benjamin Netanyahu's government faces new challenges. One day after the raid, Benny Gantz, a member of Israel's war cabinet, announced his resignation. He called for the government to accept the Biden peace plan and for new elections.
In order to ensure a real victory, it is fitting that in the fall of the year of the disaster, we go to elections, which will result in the establishment of a government that will win faith and overcome the challenges.
Posting on X, Netanyahu asked Gantz to stay. This is the time for unity and not division. We must remain united within ourselves in the face of the great tasks before us. I call on Benny Gantz, do not leave the emergency government. Don't give up on unity. Many believe elections are dangerous with Israel fighting a multi-front war. Alex Trayman tells CBN News, despite Gantz's departure, Netanyahu's 64-seat coalition is secure, and Israelis want unity as they face multiple enemies.
Israelis are fighting in Gaza, left and right, alongside each other, supporters of the prime minister, opponents of the prime minister, and they would have hoped that in this time of intense security crisis that the politicians would do the same.
Meanwhile, Israelis are relishing the joy of Saturday's rescue. In an operation months in the planning, IDF Special Forces Saturday rescued 4 hostages kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. The family reunions brought a joy and glimmer of hope Israelis rarely experienced in the past 8 months. Netanyahu met with the freed hostages and their families, some calling it the biggest rescue in Israel's history since the Entebbe raid in 1976. Hamas claims more than 270 civilians died in the raid, but Israel says the number is less than 100. As the special forces brought the hostages to freedom, they sent the message, the diamonds are on their way home.
Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem. So, Chris, what's the mood in the streets now? How important is it that the hostages were rescued?
Well, it was a huge morale boost here in Israel, much-needed encouragement. You know, Israel's been experiencing so much bad news for so long. So as we saw, people were celebrating on the beaches and the streets. Israelis actually celebrating in other countries. I would say, Gordon, that, you know, Israel's a small country, but it's a big family. So it's really like family members coming home, and the plight of the hostages ever since October 7th has been an emotional trauma for the country. You can see posters and banners. When you were here, I'm sure you saw them as well, of hostages all over the country, and you get an idea of how valuable these hostages were when the code word for their return was, the diamonds are on their way home.
Yeah, I remember in Tel Aviv, the tables set for Shabbat dinner for the hostages, and it just was it's a lingering memory that yes, they're waiting for them to come home. What do you make of, you know, I've got to call it for what it is, the Hamas-controlled Gaza Ministry of Health saying that over 270 people were killed during the raid. Is there any reason to believe that number?
Seems like it's an inflated number, Gordon. What the Gaza Ministry of Health has been doing ever since the beginning of the war. There are people, like, when this operation went on, many of these Israeli forces were surrounded by hundreds of Palestinians with RPGs, with weapons, and so they had to literally fight their way out. Noah Argamardi, one of the hostages, said it was just seconds before they felt like they were able to escape. So I believe those numbers are inflated. It happens on a regular basis with the Gaza Ministry of Health. I would add, Gordon, this was an exceptional raid. It had to be coordinated literally down to the minute because these 4 hostages, 3 were in one location, 1 in another. They had to move at the same time, and to get them out, it really was, people are saying, a miracle.
Well, let's turn now to the Israeli government. So what reasons did Benny Gantz give for resigning?
Well, he said that Netanyahu is putting politics first, keeping Israel from moving forward to a real victory. He had demanded normalization with Saudi Arabia and international civilian governance in Gaza after the war. That could include elements of the Palestinian Authority, something Netanyahu opposes. And Gordon, I would just add, there's a real sense here among many Israeli analysts that I've talked to that all of this may be orchestrated by the Biden administration. And see, Gantz is really colluding with them. For example, he went to the U.S. without Netanyahu's approval about 2 months ago, and it seems like at least many of these Israeli analysts think it's kind of coordinated so they can overthrow the government and go to new elections.
Well, it seems to be the goal. I remember under the Obama administration that they actually helped campaign against him, that the State Department was involved in that. Some people that had worked on Obama's campaign were sent to Israel to help the opposition. Why this incredible opposition from the U.S. government? It just seems that we're interfering with Israeli politics.
It seems like the Obama administration, this time it seems like even more. There's a whole different policy goals. For example, the Biden administration is pushing for a 2-state solution. If there's anything over here in Israel that the Israeli people are opposing, it is a 2-state solution. So there's certainly a difference in policy matters. There also seems an overarching idea among the Biden administration. They want to appease Iran. They want to stop the war. They may want to have a negotiated settlement with Hezbollah. And that seems to be an overarching policy that puts them at odds with Israel, that is fighting for its survival against all of these Iranian proxies, from the Houthis to Hamas to Hezbollah.
Well, I remind everyone that in the first week of the Biden administration, President Biden came out with this. He didn't let the State Department do it. He did it, and he called for a 2-state solution based on the 1967 borders. If somehow Gantz gets tied to that, doesn't that actually kill his political future in Israel?
That's why he was careful when he made the speech to talk about international governance. He did say Palestinians involvement, but he kept away from, some of his statements, kept away from the Palestinian Authority. It's really a non-negotiable or non-starter here among Israelis. They knew what happened on October 7th. They even know that the Palestinian Authority, or some elements of it, were actually involved in the October 7th massacre. So really, that's, as I was talking to one analyst earlier today, he said that's the one thing that almost all Israelis agree to. They don't want a 2-state solution.
Well, let's talk about Netanyahu. How strong is he right now? I know the nation was deeply divided right before the war, right before October 7th, and there were protests in the streets, and it just seemed that Israel was being torn apart. Is that still simmering under the surface? How weak is he? And if he is weak, what message does that send to Hamas, to Iran, to the enemies of Israel?
Yeah. For one thing, I would say, Gordon, is that is simmering, and I think it actually may come more to the surface, this opposition to Netanyahu. On the other hand, since October 7th, which was probably the low point as a politician here in Israel when his ratings were so low, he's been on an upward trajectory ever since then. In fact, now more Israelis support Netanyahu as prime minister than anyone else, including Benny Gantz. And right now as well, in his coalition, they still have a stable coalition of 64 coalition partners. As long as they don't leave the government could stay till October 26, when their mandate expires. So, and it does send a message, this disunity within Israel, a message to its partners, to its enemies, Hezbollah and Iran.
All right, well, Chris, thanks for the insight. Thanks for joining us. And for you at home, please pray for Israel. The Bible asks us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and now more than ever, we need to. Hamas doesn't seem to be backing down at all. It's odd to me that the government of Gaza wants to see Gaza end up in ruins as they continue to hold the hostages. They refuse to surrender. They've refused to give up their goal of wiping Israel off the map. Then you have Hezbollah in the north. They're all Iranian proxies. They're surrounded by enemies, and it seems to be division within. So let's pray. Let's ask God for the peace of Jerusalem.